A couple of nights ago, I woke up and I was tossing and turning in my bed. Couldn't get back to sleep. Can you connect with that? That's what you call crisis. Now, crisis is a moment of truth, an intense moment of truth, when we become aware of something that goes on in you or around you. A sense of being overwhelmed, a sense of feeling destroyed or defeated. And that is why we say that crisis is inevitable. Whether you are good or bad, smart or foolish, whether you are doing things right or wrong, crisis is bound to come. Inevitable. You just can't avoid it. Crises are also variable. They are different things to different people. And sometimes they are from outside of you, over which you have no control. Look at the weather or the stock exchange. Crisis is inevitable. It is variable. Crisis can also be from within. In my own body, let's say I have a little intense pain. I find myself in ER. Do I have a control over it? Not at that moment. Probably a couple of years prior to that you had. Or something goes on in your head and you go into a depression. Crisis can also be emotional. It can also be relational, between a friend and a friend, a spouse and another spouse, husband and wife, or between people and people, ethnicity. And when crisis comes our way, we realize that we can do one thing or another. Some of us withdraw. We go into a shell. We insulate ourselves. We try to go it alone. Don't do that. That's not a good way. Ask for help. Sometimes it's possible that you and I choose someone else and blame it on that individual. We call it scapegoating. Sometimes we let out our frustration on the one who is next to us. It could be your spouse or your child, or for a boy or a girl, it could be the pet animal. We call it displacement. Sometimes we also find ourselves blaming God. Where are you? God, are you listening? Do you care about me? Crisis comes your way most unexpectedly, even when you are doing the good thing, the godly thing. You remember the time when Jesus would turn to his apostles and say, "Get into the boat and launch into the sea," and they obey him. A good thing, a godly thing. And what happens? They sail right into the midst of a storm and they nearly die. Crises are inevitable. They are variable. They also are unpredictable. But the good news is that when you find yourself in the midst of a crisis, like a couple of nights ago, I found myself awake. You and I have something to do. We can choose our response. We can turn to God. And so after tossing and turning and trying to think of something else, distracting myself, it didn't work out. And so what did I do? I had to get up, fall on my knees and say, I let go and I let you, God. And that is when you experience peace. And so in a moment of crisis, we have at least 3 ways to go. We can become aware of God in our midst. And Christmas reminds us that his name is Emmanuel, God with us, in good times and in bad, in health and in sickness, in life and in its various moments, God is with us. That's his name, Emmanuel. The second response we could give is to lean onto the care and concern of God. The second reading that was proclaimed so well reminds us that our God is a God of endurance and encouragement. And there he is, every step of the way, all the way, walking with us, guiding us, coaxing us, convincing us, telling us that all will be well with us because he watches over us. A God of endurance, a God of encouragement. And there is also a third response that is possible. Control. That's a big ticket item. We all like to be in control, right? And yet, there comes a time when we realize that we are not able to control many things. In fact, there comes a time when we just cannot control anything. And that is when we need to remember that God is in control. And that is when we need to let go and let God in. And as we approach a crisis, and the gospel of the day that brings us to John the Baptist gives us an approach for our crisis that we call our sinfulness, our weakness, our brokenness. You know, some of us are very, very aware of the truth in our sinfulness, where we are, what we are, where we have been. And we stress that truth so much that we forget the grace of God. And we don't approach God for his mercy, for his forgiveness. There are also others in our midst who emphasize the grace of God so much that we forget the truth of our actions, that our words and actions have consequences. But then as parents, you do such a wonderful job. When you correct a child, you forgive that child. You are very gracious with your child. And yet, you remind your child that actions have consequences. That is the truth. And when that grace and truth come together, there is peace in the family. That's what John the Baptist is talking about in the gospel of the day. When you and I kneel in the confessional, acknowledging our sins and invoking the mercy of God, what is happening there? Truth and mercy, grace are coming together. And when they come together, there is peace, there is reconciliation. And so, sisters and brothers, as you and I become aware of our sinfulness, let's never lose sight of the mercy that God is. You know, the saints always remind us that there is no saint without a past, and there is no sinner without a future. Every pencil has an eraser, because all of us make mistakes. And on the 13th of this month, there will be 6 other priests here to officiate at the sacrament of reconciliation for us. We could go there, bring our truth, and when the mercy of God, the grace of God meets it, there is peace. A moment of crisis makes us aware of our truth. If only we can bring God's grace to meet our truth, you and I will be at peace. And you will not be like me, tossing and turning on your bed at 3 a.m. precisely because at that moment I became aware of my truth and forgot the grace of God. God's grace is available just for the asking. Come to the Lord, no questions asked. All sins are forgiven, where our truth and His grace come together so beautifully. That is what we find time and again in the gospel, whether it be Zacchaeus, or it be Samaritan, or even the thief on the right side of the cross as Jesus is hanging on the cross. Truth and grace coming together. See you in church on the 13th so that you and I could bring our truth to meet the grace of God that is available for all of us. Our crisis may shake us. Shake they will. But they need not break us, because God's grace is always there. And that is His truth.